Australia is taking action on UFOs. AI and copyright law is suddenly an issue. Sasquatch are working with benevolent ETs. There's a new update on the Peru alien attack. The Congress has requested the Inspector General of the intelligence community for information about classified UFO reverse engineering programs. UFOs are alien craft and not reverse engineered, according to a prominent UFO researcher. And there's a curious Space Force connection to the Maui fires.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Welcome to this week's edition of Exopolitics Today, the Week in Review. There's a lot of stories I want to cover. And just to remind you, for those that maybe want to follow up on any of these stories, that you could just go to my Twitter feed and you can get all the links there. So that's twitter.com/Michael Salla. Now, Twitter is officially known as X. I don't know when they're going to change it to x.com. Whether, at that point, I guess this series becomes X-rated. I don't know if you're old enough to be watching these Week in Reviews after that happens, but hopefully you are. So let's go over to my Twitter feed. So let's take a look at this. The first thing that I put out last week was the announcement that my book, U.S. Army Insider Missions, where I discuss JP's missions, both to off-world locations and to underground locations on Earth, that book is now available in audio edition. So so you can go to audible.com or you can go to amazon.com and you can find the audio edition. Very handy if you're very busy like me and you don't have time anymore to read books, that you listen to books instead while you're driving, while you're walking around doing chores. So this is my preferred way now of reading books, which you can do now with US Army Insider Missions. Okay, well, here's an interesting story. The UFO topic is becoming a hot issue in Australia. There's a major story in this newspaper, the Sydney Morning Herald, which is probably one of the largest, if not the largest, newspaper in Australia. Strange that newspapers still survive in Australia. Everywhere else, I guess the New York Times, the Washington Post has survived mainly, but yeah, the Sydney Morning Herald still is operating. And in Australia, the testimony by David Grush is getting a lot of attention. People are very interested in Australia about this issue. And I thought this was very interesting because in my tweet, I mentioned this Canadian Member of Parliament, Larry Maguire, who came forward about a month ago. He actually approached the Minister for Defence of Canada and told her that, look, the AUKUS powers, and AUKUS stands for Australia, United Kingdom, and the United States, that they paused to make major UFO disclosure initiatives, announcements. And somehow he has heard from the grapevine, people who pay attention to national security issues that are members of Parliament do have often high-level sources within the military who will come and speak to them confidentially and tell them things just to kind of get legislation moving in desirable areas. So this MP was approached. He was told that the AUKUS powers are going to be making official UFO announcements soon. And so if Canada didn't want to be embarrassed, then they need to start taking action. So I thought that was very interesting, that kind of a letter that Larry Maguire wrote that became public. and now here you have in Australia the UFO issue is taking off. Australia is very much controlled by the mainstream media. There is a alternative media in Australia, but the mainstream media there really is very powerful in shaping the mindset of people. So as long as the mainstream media doesn't talk about UFOs aren't an issue. But now here you have the Sydney Morning Herald bringing the UFO issue to the public awareness, and so this is setting the stage for some big announcements soon. Okay, well, this was a very interesting story. I found that this was concerning a copyright case involving artwork that was generated by artificial intelligence, and the judge ruled in favor of the US Copyright Office that did not award a copyright to this AI-generated art case or artwork on the basis that a human needs to be involved in generating or creating copyright artwork. And I thought that was very interesting, because I imagine there's going to be many more cases like this coming up. And we do have in the United States the Citizens United case, where the US Supreme Court ruled that corporations are entitled to be treated as people and have the same rights as people, as far as the Supreme Court is concerned. So, the precedent is set there, I think, for these kind of non-human groups. If a corporation can be given the same status as humans, you do wonder when some judge or when the Supreme Court is going to say that AI is in some way can be granted some rights or many rights similar to human rights. So that is a very interesting case. I know there have been many episodes of the Star Trek series, sci-fi series, that kind of like go over the ethical and legal issues of artificial intelligence being recognized as fully human or having rights that can be contested in a court of law. I think there's some episodes that talk about this particular issue. So as the singularity approaches, that's Ray Kurzweil's term for when artificial intelligence begins to self-replicate and become self-aware and doesn't need humans to control it, then we imagine that these kinds of issues are going to become much more significant. Okay, so let's go to this interview I did with Kawani Lapsaritis. And he is one of the oldest, if not the first person to come out with a book on Sasquatch. I know that people have reported Sasquatch for decades. Maybe we go back to the turn of the century. But I believe Kawani Lapsaritis is the author of the first book on Sasquatch, or if not one of the earliest books on Sasquatch. And he is a very interesting person. He talked about how at 12 years old, he developed this interest in Sasquatch, and then he began telepathically communicating with them in 1979. And for the last 44 years now, he's been in communication with both Sasquatch and benevolent ETs. He says that the Sasquatch work very closely with benevolent ETs, and they're trying to uplift humanity, get us to become responsible custodians of the planet, and to avoid planetary disaster. So he talks about what it was like to meet and communicate with Sasquatch, how they look for particular types of people who are very empathic, caring, heart-centered. They avoid anyone that's got guns and is out there hunting, even for them. That clearly they are very highly intelligent and incredibly psychic beings. And I thought in the interview, one of the things that I found very interesting was how he said that the Sasquatch predated the arrival of the Anunnaki, that the Anunnaki according to multiple sources, arrived around 400,000, 500,000 years ago and genetically upgraded the hominids at the time, Neanderthals, and that the Sasquatch actually were created by earlier extraterrestrial civilizations who actually created the earliest human species as well. So that means by the time the Anunnaki arrived around 400,000, 500,000 years ago, the primitive humans that they saw on the Earth were already hybrids created from earlier interventions by different extraterrestrial civilizations. And that, I believe, was what made the humans a very interesting species, according to information that Elena Danan received from Enki, or Prince Ea, that he saw the humans as having this incredible composite of different extraterrestrial genetics. And Alex Collier has also talked about that. He has described the Patal as this kind of very early advanced extraterrestrial civilization. Some call it the builder race that was here on Earth, and that there have been multiple interventions. And so the Anunnaki were kind of like a relatively late arrival, 400,000 years ago or so, that they were kind of like at the tail end of many interventions by other civilizations. So I thought that was very interesting that Kawani Lapsaritis talked about that. So here's an update on the alien attacks in Peru. The official government position on the alien attacks in Peru is that this involved miners wearing jetpacks who were active in trying to scare the villagers there in Peru to get away. And I've talked about this in my last week's Week in Review, where I talked about military exercises that were being conducted at the same time as these attacks occurred, which to me is very suspicious, because often we see false flag attacks being preceded by military exercises. But this was very interesting. Here's someone who is in the political leadership of the San Pedro de Pintoyacu, Ivan Paima, to ask for help, and he talks about the beings that were attacking the community. So I'm just going to play this for you here. I'll play from the beginning and I'll read it out. Have you arrested any of them? Have you shot them? Have you done something? We have tried to capture it, but you can't, because they are armored people. We shoot one, but we didn't nothing to it. Around the community, they tried to capture it, but they seem to fly to the space again. Okay, so now it's just a loop. So that tells us that these creatures, they were armored. In other words, they were shooting point blank at these creatures, and that these creatures flew into space. Now, certainly a jetpack can move very quickly, but why would someone say that they flew into space? I mean, that suggests something that moves very quick, and jetpacks are not designed to withstand a volley of bullets. Someone who's flying in a jetpack, which is very noisy, these villagers never said anything about this being noisy. These jetpacks, people, whoever was these aliens, were shot at point blank. So either it's a alien that is using advanced technology, or it's part of a false flag operation where operatives, humans, dressed up as aliens, wearing some kind of bullet-resistant armor, using some kind of advanced jetpack, were able to come in and scare this. So that is very, very possible. And given that there was a military exercise at that very time when these attacks began on July 11 of this year, then that's a possibility. So that's very interesting. Okay, so this was an article by Christopher Mellon, who is one of the people that was associated with the To the Stars Academy. That's Tom DeLonge's initiative to promote UFO disclosure. And he wrote a very lengthy article on the Debrief. And the Debrief is the same news site that put out the initial story on David Grush that became a kind of worldwide issue, or that just put it out there for the world to look at. So Christopher Mellon, he put out this article on the Debrief, and it's a well-written article. He talks about UAPs, historical UFO reports, why they're serious. He talked about ATIP, Luis Elizondo, those people that he's been associated with through the To the Stars Academy. And he gives a very brief mention of UFO crash retrieval projects, just a very cursory mention, but doesn't dig any deeper. Now, for someone who's interested in these UAP reports, who's worked for 20 years in the intel community, immediately, one has to be suspicious of, what is his motivation for writing this article. I mean, he's really putting out there the message that the UAP issue is a serious one, worth paying attention to, goes into this analysis of all of these UAP cases and how they've been historically studied, but just gives a very cursory treatment of the reverse engineering of captured UFO craft that David Grush and others have been talking about. So, immediately that kind of brings to mind, is what Christopher Mellon doing, is that really just a form of a limited hangout? Or is he just another gatekeeper like Sean Kirkpatrick, the director of the Arrow office? I mentioned last week that Sean Kirkpatrick, in coming out and attacking David Grush's testimony, saying that there's no evidence of these reverse engineering projects in corporations or any government-funded enterprise, he's very clearly identified himself now, or revealed himself to be a gatekeeper, that his job is not to reveal the truth of what's happening with UAPs. It's to be a filter. It's to be a gatekeeper to ensure that whoever reports to the Arrow office, that those reports don't get revealed to the general public, because clearly what he is doing is he is filtering out anything that to his satisfaction doesn't constitute evidence. And of course, what is evidence? If a highly credentialed insider comes forward and says, I worked on these projects, and I worked on this for 5 years, or a classified reverse engineering project, and he gives testimony of that, Kirkpatrick and the Arrow office will receive that testimony, they'll record it, but they won't release it to the general public. So he's a gatekeeper. And it seems to me that this is Christopher Mellon seems to be doing something very similar. Okay, now here's a very interesting article. It is by a veteran Australian journalist, Bill Chalker, who, let me increase the size of that, maybe you can see a little bit more, The Ultimate Secret. So he wrote a very long article about crash retrieval operations in Australia. And so there's a lot of history of crash retrievals. I mean, he is a very careful researcher. He's trying not to get ahead of the data and saying that, these crashes really happen. He's just presenting the data, saying that these UFO crashes did occur. So, and that Australia has quite a history of UFO crashes. And so he goes over many, many cases. It's a very long article, but I highly recommend that you take a look at The Ultimate Secret and the Australian Experience by Bill Chalker, a veteran UFO researcher out of Sydney, Australia. And Australia is one of the Five Eyes countries. I mentioned earlier that Australia is part of the AUKUS alliance, Australia, United Kingdom, and the US, designed to counter China. And Australia is now part of that kind of top-tier club where the United Kingdom, the US, and now Australia share all their secrets on these advanced technology projects. That was, I believe, the key purpose, or one of the key reasons why the United States arranged for Australia to be given these nuclear-powered submarines, these Virginia-class submarines that are going to be built and given to Australia, because now Australia has access to the same level of nuclear technologies and secrets that the UK and the US share regularly. And I believe that that actually is more relevant to the sharing of technologies associated with the reverse engineering of alien spacecraft and building these reverse engineered spacecraft for secret space programs. So Bill Chalker, well worth looking at that article if you have some time. So here's a tweet concerning Representative Tim Burchett. He is the congressman. He and Anna Luna were the two members of Congress that were behind the UAP hearings at the U.S. Oversight Committee that was held on July 26. And he has followed up with Representative Luna and 4 other members of Congress with a letter to the Inspector General of the intelligence community. And they're asking him for details on these reverse engineering projects. So here you have an example of members of Congress putting pressure on the Inspector General of the intelligence community, saying, well, you know, we're being told that these classified reverse engineering programs of UAPs are being held. We are holding hearings on these, so we want you to give us a briefing. We want you to write to us and give us any information that you have about individuals associated with these reverse engineering programs. And this is a very important letter. And the initiative is important because what it means is that the Inspector General of the intelligence community can't just ignore this. The US military, the intelligence community, they do pay attention to the US Congress when it demands things, and they try to comply as much as possible. So, you know, this is just one more nail in the coffin of the secrecy system. The secrecy system is on the way out. I mean, the UAP Disclosure Act for 2023 that was unanimously passed by the US Senate, and that will be incorporated as an amendment in the National Defense Authorization Act for 2024 that will be passed in the next few months and become law, that creates a system for UAP disclosure and asserts things like eminent domain and organizations and individuals that don't disclose what they know on UAPs, on non-human life and technologies, that they will be financially sanctioned. So once that comes out and once that comes into effect, the secrecy system won't be able to survive. So between now and that particular UAP Act coming into effect, you are going to have a lot of disclosures, people wanting to get ahead of what is coming, that the secrecy system is coming to an end. So, you know, there's only months, maybe at most, kind of middle of next year when the UAP Act goes into effect, that you're going to have like a flood of disclosures, people coming forward, because now legislation will have been passed it will be illegal to withhold this information from Congress. So there'll be more whistleblowers coming forward because now they can be protected, because in revealing the continuation of these UAP programs that aren't being reported to the proper authorities, then they are less likely to be sanctioned. They're going to be given protection, and those that are withholding the secrets are going to be heavily sanctioned. So yeah, I think this is an important development. Okay. Oh, well, this was very interesting. I was very surprised to watch this interview with Jeremy Corbell and Andrew Como. So let's listen to it. I think it only goes for 2 minutes. I think it's well worth listening to what. Whoops! What did I do? I think I went too far forward there. Okay, let's go back to that particular story. Here we go. All right. So Jeremy Corbell did an interview with Chris Como on some podcast. So Jeremy Corbell, who has been very prominent in putting out information concerning Bob Lazar and more recently David Grush, he is of the opinion that the UAP phenomenon is extraterrestrial, which is fine. I think a lot of UAPs are extraterrestrial, but that none of these are reverse engineered from alien technology. And that's very revealing, because he is basing that statement on what certain people have said who have come forward to talk about alien reverse engineering programs at corporations. Beginning with Bob Lazar, he said that back in '89, when he came forward, and Jeremy Corbell did a documentary on the Lazar revelations, Lazar said that the technologies were just too advanced. It was like giving iPhones to 17th century Americans or 18th century Americans. They had no clue how they operate, let alone reverse engineer these. So that is something that Bob Lazar said. And also another scientist, Dr. Eric Davis, he was behind he was involved in the leaking of these notes that he took of a meeting he had with Vice Admiral Thomas Wilson after Wilson retired as the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, where Davis and Wilson basically talked about these UFO reverse engineering programs in corporations, but that none of these were successful. They couldn't make any progress. So as far as Jeremy Corbell and others are concerned, what the data that is available through whistleblowers that he's worked with, and presumably David Grush as well, is that these reverse engineering programs of captured extraterrestrial technologies exist, that these do involve non-human craft, but that the attempts to reverse engineer them have been unsuccessful. So that means that all of these people that have been coming forward talking about secret space programs, they're making it up, if you follow Corbell's line of thought, which is nonsense. But nevertheless, I thought that was very revealing to kind of like understand where certain people are coming from in terms of their positions on these UAP reverse engineering programs. So some people are willing to concede that the programs exist, that they're happening, but they will not concede that the programs have been successful and that secret space programs have been in operation for decades. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, I have a serving and active military whistleblower that is talking to me and revealing details of actually working and being taken on secret spacecraft that are part of a secret space program. And it's not just JP's word for it. He's given me photos, and these were published in Volume 1 of the Secret Space of U.S. Army Insider Missions. So there is evidence there. If Jeremy Corbell ever wants to kind of learn more, he's free to contact me, and I'm happy to brief him. Okay, so here is a very interesting development. So India just achieved a successful landing on the moon's south pole only days after Russia attempted to send the craft to the same area had failed. So that's very curious. I mean, there's someone up there on the moon welcome the Indians, but telling the Russians, no, we don't like what you're doing. Very interesting. But the bottom line here is that India is fast becoming a major space power. India has now joined the United States, Russia, and China in successfully landing craft on the moon. And so that's very, very interesting. So Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, is saying that he is, of course, delighted that India successfully achieved this landing on the moon with its Chandrayaan-3 craft, and is saying that, well, there'll be many other countries from the global south that will be following India in its footsteps. Well, we'll see if that happens. Very expensive to create a space program. Certainly, major spacefaring nations all have large economies. Smaller countries, many countries in the global south just won't be able to afford that. But nevertheless, good to be confident, optimistic. Now, the big question is, at what point will India's space program discover that there are ancient ET bases and technologies on the moon, including somewhere around the South Pole? When India discovers this, will they be revealing this to the world? That'll be interesting to see if that happens. Maybe that's why maybe that's why Russia wasn't allowed in. I'm not sure why the Russian space program failed to land a craft on the moon. It's very curious that India succeeded where Russia failed, given that Russia has a much longer history in space operations, and Russia has a secret space program. So why did its public space mission to the moon fail? Very interesting question. Okay, so here was something very. I was very happy to see this. This is the highlights. It goes for 16 minutes. Highlights of a remote viewing of the Atlantic space arc. Now, JP, who, as I said, is actually active U.S. Army. He's serving on various missions into space and into underground civilizations or underground or underwater locations on the planet Earth. He actually has conducted 4 missions so far to this underwater space arc somewhere in the Bermuda Triangle. And I was asked by the person who founded the crypto viewing, that is Dick Allgaier. I met him in Hawaii in January of this year. And we just talked a little bit, and he said, oh, well, if you want me to do a remote viewing experiment of any of the projects that you've been involved with, let me know. Don't talk about it. Don't give me any details. Just contact. I'll send someone to contact you, and it'll be a double-blind experiment. So that's what happened. It was a double-blind experiment. So someone contacted me. I told them all about JP's missions to this Atlantic space arc, what JP saw there. That was a spacecraft at the bottom of the ocean, hieroglyphs on the walls, giants in stasis chambers, portals, time dilation, all those things. And so this person came up with the right protocols, a set of alphanumerics for the remote viewing project, and he handed off those alphanumeric coordinates to a second targeter who didn't know what those alphanumerics referred to, and that second targeter then handed it off to the remote viewing team. And this is the military protocol. There are many people claiming to be doing remote viewing out there. Some people do it without any kind of blind protocols at all. That's where you can have a lot of subconscious beliefs or opinions or views skewing the data. Even single blind experiments can also be compromised by subconscious belief systems. So that happens as well. So the double blind is what the military uses, and that's what the crypto viewing team uses. And that's been determined to be the most rigorous and the most accurate remote viewing. So what did they find? If you go and listen to this, the highlights of the remote viewing experiment that was conducted sometime around March and April. So this has now come out. The highlights have come out a couple of months later. You will hear firsthand how the remote viewers confirmed key aspects of what JP said. So to me, this is very important corroboration for JP, that his missions to this space ark, 4 of them so far, to this submerged space ark in the Atlantic Ocean, that has been corroborated by this double-blind experiment involving 4 remote viewers who did not know anything about JP or the Atlantic space ark beforehand. So to me, this is very powerful confirmation using a rigorous scientific protocol of remote viewing that is still used today by the military for intelligence gathering purposes. So that's worth attending or worth watching. Now, here's an interview I did with Dr. Rebecca Hardcastle Wright, who is an expert in exo-consciousness. So she came up with the term exo-consciousness because she believed that consciousness studies really needed to kind of like tackle this issue of what happens when people start interacting with extraterrestrials. How does the extraterrestrial phenomenon impact consciousness? So she came up with this term of exo-consciousness, and I think it's a very important term. To me, it touches upon a very important issue that we discussed in the interview, which is how does human consciousness interact with extraterrestrial technologies, especially reverse-engineered extraterrestrial technologies. And we discussed this case about this Singaporean super soldier who was able to interface with this fly-by-thought technology that was developed by the US Air Force for a modified F-15F series. And that modified F-15 had this fly-by-thought technology, and that the normal Air Force pilots that flew those things, they had to have their gamma brainwave activity stimulated by pharmaceutical products because that was the only way that they could fly these craft. But what was happening was that the pilots would then suffer brain injuries because their brains couldn't stay in this heightened gamma brainwave activity for too long, even with pharmaceutical products, whereas this Singaporean super soldier could. So it shows that human consciousness can handle extraterrestrial technologies, but not everyone can do it. There needs to be training. There needs to be some augmentation. Now, the US Air Force tried pharmaceuticals. That didn't work. And in this interview, we discussed, well, how can the brain or how can consciousness be augmented to interface with human technologies? Rebecca talked about things like meditation, things like being able to naturally expand your gamma brainwave activity. And there's going to be technological means of doing that as well, such as transhumanism, where there's going to be technologies or pharmaceutical products or a combination of the two kind of augmenting people so that they can interface with extraterrestrial technologies. And that's coming, because quite clearly, just taking the very simple example of fly-by-thought technology. I mean, clearly, fighter pilots that can fly aircraft using their thoughts as opposed to instrumentation are going to be much quicker, much more effective than pilots that can't. So they're gonna be forced to develop these kind of like heightened gamma brainwave activities to be able to successfully interact with extraterrestrial technologies. And if they can't do it through rigorous meditation, kind of like special acoustic methods for accelerating brainwave activity in the brain, they're going to resort to pharmaceuticals or transhumanist techniques. And so this is a very important issue, and I think exo-consciousness is a vitally important concept to understand as we move more and more into a world that is coming, where people's abilities to interface with extraterrestrial consciousness or extraterrestrial technologies are going to be highly valued. And this is one of the reasons why JP has been recruited into the army, and why he's allowed to participate in these secret space program missions, and why he's allowed to reveal this to me. It's because he has the consciousness or the DNA to be able to interface with these extraterrestrial technologies without hurting himself in any way. And that's already valued by the military. And I think once disclosure happens, you're going to have more and more people valuing those abilities. Okay, so here an announcement that the webinar I did last Saturday, that's August 19, is now available on Vimeo and Brighteon. So it went for 2 hours and 39 minutes, a lot of information on there. That's just the presentation. The Q&A, that's an additional 40 minutes or so. If you wanted to see that, you would have to go to Crowdcast and watch the webinar there. But if you just want to see my presentation, that goes for 2 hours and 40 minutes, then you can get that on Vimeo and Brighteon. So definitely I recommend that. Okay, so here we have a New York Times story on Professor R.V. Loeb's extraterrestrial investigations. So the New York Times, it's putting out there to the world that this Professor R.V. Loeb, the Harvard astronomer, former chair of the astronomy department, that he is a big proponent that extraterrestrial life exists, that some of these objects coming into our solar system are artificially created by extraterrestrials, such as Oumuamua, that interstellar object that he wrote a book about. And more recently, he launched an investigation or an expedition to off the coast of Papua New Guinea, where he recovered these spherules, tiny sphere-like remnants of a crashed object, interstellar object, that crashed there in the Pacific. And he's putting out data saying that this is a artificial extraterrestrial object, or that was created by extraterrestrials. So he's putting out that information, and his information is very helpful for the scientific community that for decades has been brainwashed into believing that the UAP issue, UFO issue, is nonsense, tinfoil hat conspiracy theory, not worth wasting any time on. Now, Loeb and, of course, the major media is very quickly persuading the scientific community that the UFO issue is very significant, both as a scientific issue, according to Loeb, and also as a national security issue, as we are seeing through Congress and passing legislation, holding hearings, saying that UAPs, UFOs, are a national security threat. Now, this was a passage that I kind of wanted to address in this was, and I'll read it out to you. In the New York Times story on Avi Loeb's extraterrestrial investigations, quote, Loeb says he gets attacked from both sides, by his colleagues in the mainstream and by the UAP crazies who get upset when he dismisses their most ridiculous theories by pointing to the laws of physics. There are serious problems with... Okay, so end quote. So that's Loeb's opinion in the New York Times story as summarized by the author. And so Loeb is there saying that he's in kind of in the middle. He's in the happy medium, if you like, where he is attacked both by those in the scientific community who think that this is a conspiracy theory, and those who are UAP crazies who get upset because Loeb is not endorsing their views about secret space programs, extraterrestrial contact, reverse engineering programs concerning UAPs and so forth. So Loeb is taking this kind of... he takes the scientific method to this kind of extreme, in my opinion. He's by no means a moderate when it comes to analysis of data concerning UFO issues. I did an interview with Avi Loeb. I presented my case that the UFO issue is kind of like an intelligence gathering exercise where you got to gather intelligence from all sources. I mentioned earlier remote viewing. That's a source. Whistleblower testimony. That's a source. Contactees, another source. And you've got scientific data. Again, another source. But when you take the position like Avi Loeb that the only thing that matters is the scientific data, then you're really taking an extreme position. So I by no means think that Avi Loeb is kind of in the middle and balancing these two extremes. His position is an extreme. So this is, I think, very important, because anyone who looks at the UFO issue and says that this is something that you can understand using scientific methodologies, they are really putting out a very limited perspective, an extreme position, because from the very beginning, the UFO issue, as it emerged in the Second World War, even prior to the Second World War, has been a very important national security issue. As a senior Canadian radio engineer, Wilbert Smith reported back in 1952, he wrote to the Minister for the Department of Transportation in Canada. He said that the flying saucer issue, they called it flying saucers back then, rather than UFOs, and now that it's being called UAPs, but they called it flying saucers. He said that the flying saucer issue was classified more highly than the hydrogen bomb, and he's absolutely correct. So when people like Avi Loeb comes along and say, well, the UFO issue is something that we can understand using scientific methodologies, he's being very naive in saying that, or foolish, really, in putting out that kind of extreme position. But I thought I'd kind of address that. Okay, so tomorrow night, that is, I believe it's at it's at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so that's 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Elena Danan is doing a webinar where she discusses a possible false flag alien invasion being orchestrated by the deep state of the cabal. So she's going to present what she's been told by the Galactic Federation of Worlds about whether or not something like that could be conducted. Will they attempt it? She will give the data that she has been given by the Galactic Federation on that issue, because there are a lot of people now saying that we are on the verge of an alien false flag event. Certainly events in Peru, what happened in Las Vegas with that alien that was sighted in a backyard after a UFO streaked across the skies and landed in that area of this household residency. And of course, the UFO was seen by hundreds of people and videotaped. So are these preludes to a false flag alien event of some kind? Will it be an invasion? Will it be a salvation event? We don't know. So I recommend Elena's webinar tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Okay, so coming to false flag events. So I have to be very careful how I talk about this, because YouTube is not too friendly when it comes to people talking about events that involve mass casualties being in any way associated with false flags. So I will be very careful how I word this, but there is a story by Dr. Joseph Farrell, who has a website, gizadeathstar.com, and he presents his summary, his analysis of what happened in Maui. So he goes through different things. He brings up different categories. First category is a distinct pattern of anomalies. So there were things that happened, the water being turned off, the sirens not going off, police not allowing people to leave the area, that are very, very suspicious. And let's kind of like, that's indicative of some kind of false flag event. Profile chemtrails and spraying, well, again, things that were happening that set up the conditions where this wildfire, a brush fire nearby, could take off so quickly. And of course, if firefighters and residents in Maui or the Lahaina couldn't fight this using water because the water was turned off, well then, obviously that fire would have spread very, very quickly. Okay, mechanisms of ignition, poor forest maintenance, and no control brush burns. Well, that's very interesting. I mean, Maui is very densely populated. There is a lot of tourism there, and I know that I lived on the Big Island of Hawaii for 17 years, and they were always dealing with brush fires and burning off the brush, because that could very quickly spread. So that they weren't doing this in Maui, I mean, that's very suspicious. Okay, and mechanisms of ignition, potential indications of possible energy weapons use. Okay, well, this is where we get into very sensitive territory. There are a lot of people that believe that some directed energy weapon was used in Lahaina. Now, that is, of course, speculation. There's no clear evidence of this, but there are some curious things. I mean, some people have pointed out that the directed energy weapons don't work on structures or objects that are a certain shade of blue. And sure enough, structures and objects, clothing, for example, that was blue, survived the fire. So very, very interesting. I really haven't done much detailed research on directed energy weapons being used against residential neighborhoods, but certainly it's something we need to be aware of and investigate. I mean, that's important. Okay, now, but this was one of the things. Here we go. Okay, the odd Space Force connection and the odd timing of the Chinese laser announcement. So that's, again, another very interesting connection. Now, China apparently was doing some announcements concerning directed energy weapons or lasers. So interesting that happened at that time. And he comes up with a Space Force connection that points out that Space Force has a presence on Maui. Now, Kerry Cassidy from Project Camelot has also referred to this Space Force connection. So she was the first to refer to that. So, I've been to Lahaina, I've been to Maui a few times, and I can say there's no Space Force facility in the Lahaina area as far as I know. The Space Force does have a facility on Haleakala volcano, and that's quite a few miles away from Lahaina. It had nothing to do with the Lahaina fire, and definitely there is a Space Force presence on Maui and at Haleakala. Now, I don't know of underground Space Force facilities there in Maui. It doesn't make sense that a fire that would affect the Lahaina Old Town would somehow impact an underground Space Force facility. If it existed, I'm certain that it didn't really impact the Space Force facility on Haleakala, which is at 10,000 feet. But nevertheless, there is a very interesting Space Force connection that people like Dr. Joseph Farrell and Kerry Cassidy have brought forward. Again, another area, another thing to investigate. So that is really it for my week in review for this Saturday, August 26th. It really has been a lot of interesting developments. I look forward to the coming week with Congress coming back. I think Congress comes back after the Labor Day weekend. So it will be very interesting to see what happens when Congress reconvenes. So I believe September is going to be a really big month. So I'm looking forward to presenting you all of the updates that I learn about and covering it for you in my week in review next week. So thank you and aloha.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.